The screen glared back at me in the freezing hospital hallway. $0 and 0 cents. My medical trust fund, all $375,000 of it, had vanished. Before the shock could even hit me, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. She wrote, "We needed the money for Jordan's new house. He carries the family name. Madeline, you will figure it out. You always do." I did not scream or drop to the floor and cry. Emotion is just bad data. And I was done processing it. I simply closed the message, scrolled past her name, and dialed the one person in this world my parents were actually terrified of. My great-grandmother. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Let me know your story down in the comments. The mahogany dining table in my parents' New England estate was set for a celebration. But the only thing served was a thick stack of legal documents. It was a liability waiver. My mother, Tiffany, pushed the papers toward me with a practiced, hollow smile. She claimed it was just a formality to ensure I would not legally contest the trust fund withdrawal. Jordan needed a clean slate for his new property, she explained, before looking me dead in the eye and warning me not to be selfish. Family comes first. My father, Marcus, leaned over his steak to remind me how well my surgical residency was going. He insisted I was doing fine on my own. But my brother really needed this win. I looked down at my hands, my fingers brushing the cold metal of the vintage golden stethoscope resting deep in my coat pocket. My grandfather gave it to me right before he passed away. He believed in hard work and merit. My parents only believed in Jordan. I sat there in absolute silence while they lectured me about loyalty and gratitude. If you are listening to this, you might be wondering why I did not flip the table right then and there. Why I just took the abuse. But here is the brutal truth about growing up as the designated shock absorber in a toxic family. You learn very early on that punching a brick wall only shatters your own knuckles. My silence was not a surrender. It was a calculated adaptation. A survival tactic drilled into me over 26 years. They had built a psychological prison without bars, conditioning me to believe my voice did not matter. But while they thought they were breaking my spirit, they were actually teaching me how to endure, how to observe, how to process pain into cold, usable data. I did not argue, shed a single tear, or pick up their pen. I simply stood up from my chair, thanked them for the dinner, and walked right out the front door. The drive back to my apartment was quiet. My phone buzzed in the cup holder 14 times. It was Marcus and Tiffany, demanding I turn around and sign the liability waiver. I ignored them entirely. They thought I was just a naive resident they could easily bully into submission. They forgot that, as a surgeon in training, I analyze bleeding for a living. And my trust fund was hemorrhaging. I opened my laptop the second I walked through my door. Bypassing the standard banking app, I logged directly into the family server. I was not looking for apologies or emotional explanations. I was hunting for cold data, pulling the complete transaction history for the last 8 months. There was no house deed. There was no mortgage agreement. There was only a massive, gaping financial wound. I opened the first ledger. September 14th. $50,000 wired to an offshore crypto exchange. October 2nd. $120,000 transferred to a high-stakes digital roulette platform. November 18th. $205,000 gone in a single weekend of leveraged trading. The final balance at the bottom of the screen read exactly $0. Jordan had not bought a house. He had gambled away my entire future. But that was not the kill shot. The trust required 2 signatures for any early withdrawal. Mine, or the matriarch of the family, my great-grandmother, Abigail. I pulled up the bank authorization document, There, sitting perfectly on the digital dotted line, was Abigail's signature. I knew the slight tremor in her hands and the specific slant of her cursive from years of reading her handwritten birthday cards. The ink on the screen was flawless. It was a blatant, calculated forgery. My parents had not just stolen my medical tuition, they had committed a federal felony to cover for a gambling addict. I closed the laptop. The diagnosis was terminal, and I was ready to make the cut. For 3 days, I ignored every text message and phone call to my parents. My silence was not a warning. It was a victory. They mistook my absence for submission, assuming they had successfully audited the last bit of fight out of me. My mother was so emboldened by her perceived win that she took to social media. She posted a glowing picture of her and Jordan with a sickeningly sweet caption. She wrote, "Some children completely forget the sacrifices of the people who raised them. But I am so incredibly blessed for my son, the true anchor of this family." I read that post while sitting in Abigail's study, sipping black coffee, and waiting for the final preparations of our trap. The absolute peak of their arrogance arrived on a Saturday night at the 50th anniversary gala for the family shipping empire. The ballroom was packed to the brim with hundreds of elite investors, board members, and old money aristocrats. It was the ultimate stage, and my parents marched right into the spotlight. Marcus and Tiffany stood proudly at the podium, bathed in warm applause, with Jordan smirking right beside them. They did not just play the role of proud parents, they doubled down on their delusion. My father leaned into the microphone and confidently introduced Jordan as a brilliant young real estate investor. He boasted to the entire room about Jordan's massive new property acquisition, claiming his son was the clear future of the family legacy. They spun a glittering lie in front of the most powerful and influential people in New England. Willingly, they tied their entire social standing, corporate credibility, and personal reputations to a ghost house and a gambling addict. They genuinely thought they were cementing their elite status. But all they were really doing was climbing up onto a public scaffold and adjusting the rope right around their own necks. The heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom swung wide with a deafening thud that echoed over the string quartet. The music staggered and died. Every head in the room turned. My great-grandmother stepped over the threshold, leaning heavily on her silver cane, and I walked exactly 1 pace behind her. The silence that fell over those 300 elite guests was absolute. You could hear the ice shifting inside the champagne glasses. Marcus was frozen at the podium, his hand still resting proudly on Jordan's shoulder. Tiffany's practiced smile melted into a mask of pure panic. The color drained from my brother's face so fast he looked practically translucent. Abigail did not greet the crowd or offer a polite smile. She walked straight down the center aisle, the rhythmic tap of her cane keeping time like a metronome counting down to their destruction. When she reached the stage, she did not ask for the microphone. She simply held out her hand, and my father handed it to her. Trembling, turning to the audiovisual technician in the corner, Abigail gave a single nod. I handed him the silver USB drive. The massive LED screens flanking the stage flickered. The glowing tribute photos of Jordan vanished. In their place, a high-definition projection of a bank statement illuminated the entire ballroom. Abigail's voice cut through the dead air, sharp and unwavering. She read the screen aloud. September 14th. Wire transfer to an offshore crypto exchange. $50,000. October 2nd. Digital roulette platform. $120,000. November 18th. Leveraged trading losses. $205,000. A collective gasp rippled through the sea of investors and board members. The whispers started immediately. A low, vicious hum of old money, judging new mistakes. I stood there, feeling the weight of my grandfather's golden stethoscope in my pocket. They had expected me to shrink away. They had bet the entire family legacy on a son who could not even manage a basic savings account, while discarding the daughter who audited their financial crimes with surgical precision. Marcus opened his mouth, stammering, desperately trying to construct a defense. But the data was already out there, massive and undeniable, written in bright white light for everyone to see, gripping the edges of the podium until his knuckles turned white. Marcus leaned into the microphone. His voice cracked as he tried to spin the disaster. He nervously laughed, telling the crowd of bewildered investors that it was just a temporary liquidity issue, a minor misunderstanding in a highly leveraged venture. Tiffany nodded frantically beside him, her diamond necklace shaking against her collarbone. I stepped forward. I did not raise my voice, because I did not need to. I simply pressed the button on the presentation remote. The massive screen behind them shifted with a soft, electronic hum. The gambling ledgers vanished. In their place appeared the bank authorization document, magnified by 10 feet. On the left side of the screen was the signature that approved the $375,000 withdrawal. On the right side was my great-grandmother's actual, legally notarized signature. The discrepancy was glaring. The loops were wrong. The pressure points were forced. I looked directly at my father and spoke into the dead silence. I told him he did not just mismanage an investment. He bypassed a dual authorization medical trust fund by forging the signature of the company's founder. That is not a liquidity issue. That is federal wire fraud. The ballroom erupted in hushed gasps. Several board members physically took a step back from the stage. The spin was over, and the lie was dead. Tiffany shattered completely. She lunged forward, grabbing my forearm, tears streaming down her carefully powdered face. She begged me to stop the presentation. You whispering frantically that we were family, that Jordan would go to prison, that I was destroying everything. I looked down at her hand on my arm. I felt absolutely nothing. No heartbreak. No pity. Just the cold, analytical clarity of a surgeon successfully removing a tumor. I gently peeled her fingers off my sleeve. Here is the brutal truth about people who build their thrones on favoritism. They spend decades cultivating an illusion of absolute authority, acting as if their power is a divine right. But the reality is, their superiority was never an intrinsic value. It was merely a rented facade, entirely funded by Abigail's capital and my silent endurance. They mistook a full bank account for a strong character. The second that money evaporated and the truth was exposed, they had no actual substance to stand on. Their entire empire of arrogance collapsed into dust right there on the stage. I looked down at the three of them, standing paralyzed on the stage they had built for their own triumph. I did not scream or demand an apology. I simply looked at my mother, my father, and the golden child they had sacrificed my future for. I told them they bet the entire family legacy on the wrong investment, and their market just crashed. Turning my back, I walked out of the ballroom, leaving them to the wolves of the corporate board. I blocked their phone numbers before I even reached my car. Complete, no contact, no mercy, no looking back. Within a month, Abigail legally stripped Marcus, Tiffany, and Jordan of every single cent of their inheritance. The fraud investigation triggered a massive cascade of subpoenas. They are currently drowning in Jordan's offshore gambling debt, facing federal charges with absolutely no financial safety net. Today, the air feels completely different. I slipped my arms into my crisp white lab coat and placed my grandfather's golden stethoscope around my neck. Walking down the pristine hospital corridor, I realized I did not just survive their betrayal. I am building a great legacy of my own, an empire they will never, ever be allowed to touch. If you were in Madeline's shoes, would you have done the same? Share this video with someone who needs to hear this story. And do not forget to follow for more.